Now let's look at the economics of this. I mean, it's crazy. 3 years ago, when they first started talking about reactors at Vogtle, they were talking $2 to $3 billion per reactor, which they would have talked about at North Anna as well. 3 years later, the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has confirmed that the minimum that they think a single reactor can be built for is $10 billion. So you've had 3 to 5 times rise in the price just in 3 years. And it's not going to go down. It's not going to start going down. It's going to continually go up and up and up. In Georgia, they've put the ratepayers on the hook. So if the loan guarantees go through, which is not a given, if the reactors that they want to build there are approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is also not a given, and in fact, for those designs, the NRC has already said that they don't think that this particular design, which is a Toshiba Westinghouse design, the AP1000, they don't think it can withstand a hurricane, an earthquake, or a tornado. Now, this is not an academic calculation. There was an earthquake that harmed the Perry nuclear plant east of Cleveland in 1986. So we have had an earthquake that did do damage to an American reactor. Now, thankfully, Perry was not operating at the time. We don't know what would have happened if it had been, but it knocked out pipes, it knocked out roads and bridges. Who is going to try and operate a nuclear plant in the middle of an earthquake? Secondly, the Turkey Point nuclear plant in Key Largo, Florida. Hurricane Andrew in 1991 went directly over this reactor. And it did $100 million worth of damage. It also knocked out off-site communications. So the control room at Turkey Point during Hurricane Andrew was out of touch with the rest of the world. I mean, these guys were just in this kind of spaceship that was lost in time. So these are considerations that have not yet, these are hurdles that have not yet been surmounted in Georgia. Now they've got a reactor project which is much further along than North Anna 3. And it's already tripled to quintupled in cost. North Anna 3 is way further down the line from Vogtle. They can't get private investors. No private investor will come forward to finance these projects, these 2 reactors in Georgia. They're certainly not going to come forward for North Anna, number 3, especially when you have reactors there already which are under fire. Now, the first reactor at North Anna opened in '73. So it's now, 37 years old. Its license has been extended, which is very wrong. But we're having very serious problems now with older reactors. Vermont Yankee, which also opened in the early '70s, the only reactor operating in Vermont. It's coming up for license extension next year. Now actually the process has already started. And in the course of examining the reactor, they've had terrible problems with tritium leakage, which has gone all over the site. Tritium may have made its way into the Connecticut River already, which is very serious. And now they've found cesium there. And the owner of Vermont Yankee, in a public hearing, denied that such leakage could take place, and even said that some of the pipes that were leaking didn't exist, that there were no such pipes. So of course all of Vermont is in an uproar.
Right.
In New York State, at Indian Point, which I mentioned, where the first jet that hit the World Trade Center flew over Indian Point, they have been heating the Hudson River in violation, this is more than 30 years, and they're in violation of the Clean Water Act. Finally, the regulators in the state of New York have said this can't continue, and it's been upheld in the courts. And Indian Point, the owners of Indian Point are either going to have to shut down, which I hope they do, or build billion-dollar cooling towers, for which they're going to have to get permits. And this is going to be a very interesting political battle if they proceed and try and get permits.
And these same events have played out in a smaller way here at North Anna. We've got the issue with the water being heated. Unit 3, under pressure, they agreed if they go ahead and build it, and again, they are seeking state guarantees to make sure that their costs are covered. they're going to have to put cooling towers on that, which is driven up the cost.
Right. And the cooling towers don't solve the problem. All the cooling towers do is move the problem.
Yes.
Instead of superheating the lake, now you superheat the atmosphere. And here we're having, the advocates of nuclear power claiming that atomic energy is a solution for global warming. But they're making the North Anna 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And they're failing that with a cooling tower, they're going to heat the atmosphere with all this steam. The steam, by the way, that comes through the cooling towers is chemically treated. Because if they didn't chemically treat the steam, you would have algae and other growth inside the cooling towers, which would eventually clog it. So this stuff has herbicides and algicides that go up into the atmosphere and pollute the countryside.
And in the face of all of this, the nuclear industry, with their allies, our utilities, are pushing this solar so-called renaissance.
Well, nuclear renaissance.
Nuclear,
I'm pushing a solar renaissance.
Exactly.
They're pushing a nuclear renaissance. Now, the nuclear renaissance, which we call a relapse, has been funded with over $640 million in lobbying money, which may not even account for what they've spent on the media and on hiring these flacks to run around and say that nuclear is great. There's a ton of money to be made in promoting nuclear power. If you're green and you've got a reputation and you want to make a little money, just jump, be the Benedict Arnold and go jump on the other side and start advocating nuclear plants. But the reality is that this whole new idea of a nuclear renaissance has been purchased with a tremendous amount of money, buying people, buying media, buying Congress people and senators and the whole deal.
And it's a sad state of affairs for those of us who see a much better future, a cleaner future, a sustainable future. So tell us a little bit about your ideas.
Okay, so here's the genesis of this. When we first started fighting nuclear power back in the 1970s, and there were very few who did it, and the vast bulk of the American public supported atomic energy, and nobody really thought about it. I had done my report in ninth grade in 1959, and from then until 1973, if you had asked me, I would have said I was very supportive of nuclear power. But when we saw the reality of it, we realized it was a bad thing. And so when we first started nuclear power, saying no nukes and we don't want these plants, people would say, well, what are your alternatives? I mean, if you're not going to have the energy from nuclear power, where are you going to get it? And we said, we'll put the money into wind and solar, and we'll get wind and solar. But we were talking through our heads. There wasn't much. There was some, but not much. And we actually had a Toward Tomorrow fair in 1975, and Amory Lovins was there in Amherst, Massachusetts. And there was a guy there named William Hieronymus who had this wild and crazy idea of putting huge windmills out in the oceans. And everybody laughed at him. Yes. It's just like Robert Fulton or Eli Whitney. Oh, that'll never happen. But his plans actually were reasonable and certainly doable today. So what we did was we posited a world that could run totally on renewable energy, but it was very theoretical. Now, windmills, of course, have been around 1,000 years. There were windmills in Europe in the early, late Middle Ages, actually, around 1200. They were used to pump water and to grind grain. And Persians had windmills in the 1400s. But windmills then were starting to be used for electricity in the Great Depression. There were tens of thousands of windmills all across the Great Plains. These little Jacobs windmills, they're like the Volkswagen, like the old Volkswagen. And they were great machines. They never ran out. Right. People think about reviving the old Jacobs machines, but they're very obsolete now. That's be fun for a museum piece, but not really. But we did get quite a bit of electricity from wind power in the 20s and 30s.
Right.